Bonjour. Some of my favorite YouTubers make videos like not trans enough and not bi enough, where they talk about the experience of people telling them that they're not bi enough or they're not trans enough because blank. You know, not trans enough because they're not on hormones or, you know, haven't had X surgery done. Not bi enough because they are currently dating someone the opposite sex of them, or, you know, dress too much like their assigned gender at birth or something like that. So this video is about the sort of you're not disabled enough, you're not homeless enough, which is really easy to do, and it's complicated by the fact of my taking care of myself. And let me break this down for you. So people will watch these videos, and part of why I make these videos is because 72 or 73%, depending on the statistic that you're looking at, of Americans with disabilities are living with invisible disabilities. If doctors only treated people who were visibly wounded, people would be dropping dead of cancer and burst appendixes and pretty much everything under the sun all the time. I mean, this is a no-brainer here. You can't look at somebody and say whether or not they are sick or, you know, wounded or disabled, and yet people all the time look at somebody and say, oh, you're fine, like right before they drop dead. I have actually seen somebody die, and he didn't actually look like he was going to die right before he died. This is true. And we know this, but people do this all the time. And the reason why people do this is because they're uncomfortable or they want it not to be true. But, of course, they come up with all these rationalizations. They'll go to great lengths, and human beings can rationalize anything. They say, but you don't look sick. And there have been a lot of people who have gone to great lengths to say, much more articulately than me, to explain invisible illness to people. That you can look fine, but not be fine. And doctors understand this, and people who are in pain currently understand this, and people who are trying to explain their pain to other people understand this. But the minute that you're not in pain, or that you're upset by somebody else's pain, or that you're just bothered by it, it's just too easy to say, you're fine. Because you want them to be fine. Because you're upset, because you don't like their attitude. I get that. I'm making these videos to try to, like, raise awareness, but at the same time, this isn't the most effective way of explaining to people. I hear myself, and I know that I'm complaining a lot. And this is because I am really tired of this. I feel like I have been dragged backwards through a backhoe, being dragged backwards through a wood chipper, being dragged backwards through a hedge for a long time. And for a long time, I just didn't complain because I didn't like it when everybody rushed to me to say, shut the hell up. Of course, they didn't say shut the hell up. They were like, oh, you know, you look so fine, you're so young, everything looks fine, all this stuff. Because life has taught me one thing, and that is everybody focuses on the complainer and tries to get them to shut up. Especially if the complainer is not aggressive and abusive. And I never really got the hang of aggressive and abusive. I guess because I never really had enough power to pull it off. Either that, or just some part of me never wanted to go that route. I don't know if I ever had the option of doing it and I just, like, took the higher road, or that's a story that I tell myself to make myself feel better for the fact that I'm just a weakling, and I always have been. That I've always been the bottom of the totem pole. But I know that this whininess is, I don't like it, you know? I don't like listening to myself. The more effective way of conveying information is with a sense of humor, with art, with fiction. You know, the people that I like listening to are the people who, like, say it with joy and with art and with things like that. I don't have that. For example, take atheism. So I had this interview once with Tim Minchin, who's a fantastic comic singer-songwriter. People, regardless of their beliefs, enjoy his work. And that's kind of ideal. It combines music and comedy and art. He's got style. And that's kind of ideal. You catch more flies with honey, right? Abusers know this, and conmen know this, and artists know this too. You can attract people with charm, with beauty, with things that people are attracted to. You attract people by being attractive and being charming. Abusers know this, and survivors know this. I know this, and a lot of people who haven't survived abuse, when they hear the word abuse, they think that abusers come on abusing. So they don't understand why people stay with abusers, because they think that abusers come in abusing, and they don't understand that for survivors, abuse doesn't just mean the times when the abuser is abusing. They also mean the long con where the abuser sucks you in, and then where the abuser is like apologizing and winning you back with the gifts and the things like that, and promising to never do it again, and sucking you back in, and like how you kick yourself afterwards, and how did he sucker me back in, and all those moments of doubt, and you thinking that it's you, and hating yourself for years afterwards, and just the emotional roller coaster. That's the abusive side of it. But artists also know that it's easier to tell the truth the back way. It's easier to tell the truth through lies. It's easier to tell the truth with misdirection. It's easier to tell the truth obliquely, to have them laughing and then slip it in the back way. These are the ways that we welcome in ideas that we would throw out if somebody were arguing them in our face. And I know this. I know this as somebody who, when I was brainwashed, I was still taking in ideas that I needed to survive through the arts. That was what kept me alive and sustained me, kept my heart alive. And I didn't realize that for a really long time because I was a kid. I didn't know this stuff. And now I do. It's just the problem is that this really awful stuff has been happening for so long that I've been kind of ground down. And I don't have it in me any longer. All I've got left is fight. I'm living day to day. I'm in survival mode. And I don't really have the luxury of being artistic about how I explain what's going on. I don't have the luxury of being funny right now. I can do my best to explain this, but at the end of the day, I'm still trying to survive, and what's getting me through this is my anger. So I can't just like box that away for other people's comfort when it's what I need to survive. Even though I know that runs the risk of turning people off. It's a question of survival. The people whose opinion really matters, they'll either understand or they'll be the ones who are in charge of the resources, and they probably won't be watching these videos. If they are, I can't imagine that it's going to make that much of a difference. If it does, it really shouldn't. I shouldn't have to ever say that I'm angry about this situation. I shouldn't have to hold my tongue in order to get what I need in order to survive. That's abusive. Never speak out against your government, or we won't give you what you need to survive. That's totalitarianism. That's not cool. But anyway, my point was that I know that there are better ways to say this. It's just I don't have those luxuries right now. It's just been too frackin' hard. That's just the long and short of it. I don't have that anymore. I've had that knocked off of me. All I can do at this point is complain and whine. And it's like, it's either that or shut up and be silent. And believe me, there are lots of times where I'm just like, oh, what's the point? What's the point of even complaining? Especially because, like, I hate listening to myself whine and knowing that when people say, oh, you're fine, you're not disabled, you're not homeless, and like it pushes my buttons because people have been saying that to me my whole life. And it's not helped by the fact that I try not to look like a disabled homeless hobo, because you know what? Those people are like walking targets. if you look like a disabled walking hobo, people see you and they say, oh, you know what? I could rape and murder and mug this person and nothing bad would happen to me. Do you know how I know this? Because people victimize me when I look like there would be no consequences for victimizing me. So me trying to look middle class and not disabled is protective camouflage. So, like, I'm trying not to look disabled to protect myself from getting murdered, raped, and mugged. I want to protect myself from getting attacked and victimized, but at the same time, I want to get respect for the fact that I am in need. And it's kind of like I want to have it both ways, but at the same time, it's like I shouldn't be in fear for my life if I look like what I am. Okay, it's never good to compare one type of oppression to another, but I know I'm not the only person that feels like this, who feels like you cannot, that there are lots of places in this world that you cannot openly look like what you are. And so they struggle a lot to pass as something that they're not. And so when they come out as what they are, people say, no, you're not. Like, well, that's great. I've just opened up and told you that I'm something that people get killed for. And you say, no, you're not? Well, you're getting crossed off my Christmas list and blocked from my phone. There you go. Because I don't have time for that. The most vocal people who feel like they feel a need to say, no, you're not disabled and you're not homeless because you don't look like what I'm comfortable with homeless and disabled people looking like. That they have like the 3-year-old's picture of disabled and homeless people. If you're not in a wheelchair, you're not disabled. If you're not on the corner, you're not homeless. You should be a doctor, because obviously you can make snap decisions based on just like visual things. Oh, anyway, yeah, I'm gonna back away from that rant slowly. But that's the kind of level that we're dealing with here. Is if you make snap decisions like this, you've got you're taking a 3-year-old sort of mentality of like, no, you're not. But so I believe that most people actually, if they take the time to pay attention and listen, can make the connection that, oh, okay, so not everybody who's homeless is living on a street corner. Well, that makes sense. Like, there are people who live in homeless shelters. They have shelter, they don't have a home. And a lot of homeless shelters, you can only stay there for a certain amount of time. There are people who are homeless who bounce from couch to couch. They don't have a home. They don't have a permanent address. They may get evicted at any time. They're still homeless. But people say, oh, well, you don't pay rent. Well, yes, but they also cannot count on where they're living. And they may be living in an abusive situation. Now, some of these people may be living in the lap of luxury. And I'm not saying that that never happens. But I'm also saying that if you look at it from the outside, you're not necessarily going to be able to tell what goes on behind closed doors. Just like you could say, oh, well, that's a happy family, and behind closed doors, really horrible abuse can be going on, and you don't know. You don't know. You don't have to live with whatever it is that you're judging. You don't get to judge that until, like, you got all the facts. So just sitting and looking at a video and deciding that you know the whole story is not cool. I believe that it's actually worth it to make these videos. I hope that it's worth it to make these videos. And then part of me is like, well, so if people speak up and they say like, well, no, you're not, is it worth it to answer these people? Like, when somebody's position is, you're a liar, for a long time, I didn't answer them at all because I realized, like, I was getting in arguments that there was no way to win, because when their position was, you're a liar, there's nothing you can say. But then every once in a while, I would be able to get through to somebody, and they would say, oh, well, I hadn't thought of that. Every once in a while, but that would be like really rare, that if somebody came in swinging, that most of the time they just wanted to call me out, and they would draw me out by saying, well, I just don't understand, can you explain this to me? But they didn't want to understand. They wanted me to expend all my energy trying to explain to them while they argued with me and contradicted themselves within the same sentence. But then I realized something really important, there were people I listened to that I respected who would respond to people who were saying, well, no, that's not true. And they would respond. They would lay down the facts. They would respond and they would say, well, this is why this. And they would respond in an educational way to their detractors. I wouldn't say anything because I didn't want to get sucked into the argument, but I was listening to what the person was saying and I was learning. I sought out these conversations in order to learn from the person who was responding to their detractors. That I would actually search for these things because I wanted to know how to respond to people, but I also wanted to know the truth. It's like I had these questions and I wanted to know how people responded. Like what's the answer? And so I thought, well, maybe there are a lot of other people out there who are listening. Maybe when I have these conversations, not to have them in private, but if I have them in public, if somebody confronts me in public and says, well, this is not true, maybe it is worth it to speak up. Not for that person who's never going to hear me, but for all of the people around who are listening. Because even if just one person takes home a little bit of, I never thought of things that way, that makes all the difference in the world. That if there's somebody watching this and they realize, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought that, there could be people squatting in abandoned trailers on the sides of roads and abandoned buildings just to have someplace to shelter in. But these buildings aren't really safe. They're not meant to be lived in. They're run down. They may look nice, but the thing is, you can't feel how cold it is in here. You can't smell what it is in here. You don't sleep in here with the mold and the mildew. You're not having to deal with the upper respiratory problems of living with this situation and the fact that there's really not that much that I can do about it. This place, it's not meant to be lived in, and it's broken down and I don't have the money to fix it. And at any time I can be thrown out for any reason whatsoever or no reason at all, and there's nothing that I can do about it. I'm basically living in a glorified vehicle. People can look around and say, oh, well, that's nice. I'd like to live there rent-free. I don't have any income, and I still have expenses. I have a lot of medical expenses because I'm disabled. Like it or not, I'm disabled. And you can look at me and say, well, you're able-bodied, you're young, but you don't have to live with the pain that I do. I can look at you and you can be having a migraine and I say, well, you're just fine. Just suck it up and go to work. And you'd be like, well, you don't feel the pain that I do. It's like, you don't look like you're in pain. You're not bleeding out of your eyeballs. Go to work. It's like, that's ridiculous. Again, as I said, it's a 3-year-old's approach to pain. If you're not bleeding, you're not in pain. When you live with pain all the time, you can learn to hide it. And as I said, that helps keep me from being a target for other people. And if I walked around screaming all the time, well, that would make me a target for all kinds of stuff that I don't want to deal with. And people who say, well, just get your meds right. Again, this is like a 3-year-old thing of like, well, yeah, meds will cure everything. That's obviously why we don't have any illness at all. And why there's no healthcare industry. We just give people pills and that fixes everything. Right? But the thing is that these aren't logical arguments, obviously, and trying to apply logic to them. Is it worth it to have these, to respond to these with logic? Maybe not, but maybe yes. But I have to figure out where to draw the line. How much energy am I going to expend on this? Maybe it's time to just make a video. And then whenever somebody says, well, you're not disabled. Obviously you're not homeless. I can instead link to this video and say, maybe I don't look that way, but you don't live my life. You don't have a say. Just like I don't have a say in your life. Although that's not really a fair thing either, because there are no absolutes. We judge all the time. We're human beings. We're built to judge. And there's no, because X, then Y. So we apply logic to a lot of situations that sounds good but isn't. When we say everybody's pain is their own and you can't compare pain and it's like that kind of thing. And there's some truth to that. It's like everybody's pain is valid, but if someone causes someone else pain and then is confronted with the consequences and then says, well, now I'm all upset, that doesn't compare. If somebody shoots somebody else in the face, and that somebody who's been shot in the face is upset, and then the somebody who shot them in the face feels the consequences of shooting them in the face, the pain of the consequences is not as bad as the pain of having had your face disfigured. And it's not a fair comparison. And then we have things like the distress of the privileged, where the privileged conflate their distress and say it's the same as the distress of the oppressed. And then we have things like, going back to our medical metaphors, triage, which is where you decide who to treat based on, in an emergency room situation, you decide who to treat based on who is worst off, who is most likely to die, who has the worst wounds, who is, in the most critical condition. So if you have somebody in there with a paper cut and somebody up there bleeding out of their gut, the doctor chooses to treat the person with the gut wound. If you have the person with the paper cut screaming that all pain is the same, that's not true. It's not true. So we can't have absolutes. And we can't have just all this relativism of everything is relative. All this, it's like, I think that there are truths, and I think that when we say everything is shades of gray, that's a different type of black and white thinking. You say, well, everything is shades of gray and everyone's side is valid. That's a different type of black and white thinking that is equally flawed as everything is black and white. Saying everything is shades of gray is a different type of black and white thinking. It's a different type of extremism of saying that everything can be reduced to logic. No, not true. Everything is a progressive step in understanding, but we run the risk of getting stuck in certain ways of understanding because it's difficult. It's difficult to keep progressing. While we're progressing, we're also dealing with all of the stuff in our lives. And I believe that just as most people live at or beyond their financial means, we're often living at or beyond our means of coping and stress, that if we have any free time, we fill it up with stuff. If we're bored, we'll take up a new hobby. If we're not too terribly stressed, we'll take on new duties at work or whatever. We'll start going to night school. We'll start trying to better ourselves. These kinds of things. We'll take on new stuff, so that when disaster strikes, or when we're hit in the face with something, our lives are already pretty full, and we're not prepared to stop and take stock. We don't have surplus energy, resources, time, mental and psychological bandwidth to deal with stuff that hits us when it hits us. So we're often kind of pushed over the limit. I think that this accounts for a lot of our reactivity and our general stress and anxiety, and why we rely too much on sloppy thinking and other people's thinking for us, and rely on platitudes and things that we've heard, even though we know that you can't rely on what you hear. And we don't really vet the sources of our information. And so things get kind of squirrely, when it's really important to know your source. Like, where is this information coming from? We have things like these little hand wave words like science. And then when we get hip to the fact that some people are abusing the word science and saying it's scientific, it's a scientific fact, when it's actually not, when the science is bad, then we say, oh, okay, well, we need to see the studies. And then people will say studies show that, a new study shows that. And that's that should be a red flag word right there. If it's a new study, then it hasn't been confirmed by another study. If you haven't seen the study, and this is unfortunate because most people not have read Ben Goldacre's book, Bad Science, even though if you're going to be quoting from studies, if you're going to be relying on scientific studies as your sources of information, And you should understand what makes a good study versus a bad study. Because any source of information can be corrupted. But the problem is figuring out what's a good source of information. It takes time, it takes energy, and as I said, everybody's lives are full. So how do you figure out what's a good source of information? Nobody has the time. So we want to rely on sources of information, but we don't have the time to figure stuff out. So then we wind up just letting stuff slide until we're reposting things without really thinking about it because it feels true. And then we come back to Stephen Colbert's word, truthiness, which is now more true, now with extra truthiness, because it feels true, because it reinforces a truth that we want to be true. And if you don't know the phrase confirmation bias, I strongly recommend looking it up. I know you won't. These are very human things. And these aren't things that we're going to solve, because every successive generation, they come in and then they have to survive. And they're going to make the same mistakes. Every successive generation is going to be railing at itself, and the past generation, and the following generation. You're making the same mistakes. You're judging things based on bad information and based on what you're seeing, based on what you're telling yourself, and based on what you want to believe. You're not thinking this through. You're using other people's thinking, and it's not good thinking. It's not something that you've thought all the way through. But it feels true. And it feels like you've done the thinking. Because ever since you were small, other people have done the thinking for you. But it feels like you've done the thinking because you had to read it out of books and then answer questions on tests, and many of them were essay questions, so it made you feel like you were doing the thinking. But it was an elaborate rearranging of the information that you were given without ever going beyond the sources of information provided, because you didn't have time. School filled your life. Your days and nights, so much so that any time that you had outside of school, you either filled it with extra school if you were masochistic or just really liked school and wanted to become a teacher, but that was just asking them to give you more work. Or you fled school and socialized because you wanted to have a life outside of school. But there wasn't a whole lot of finding outside sources of information that might have thrown into question some of the things that you were writing on the essay tests. And if you did, and then wrote them on the essay tests, well, then you might flunk the class. Listen to me talking about this stuff like I actually went through school, rather than just sitting on the outside. But I did have some 5-6 years of schooling before I got taken out of school. And I've read and watched a lot and listened to a lot of people talk about education, the process of education, their experiences of education, of testing, of all of these things. And there's no like one monolithic experience, but I can say that it does tend to override a lot of critical thinking and tends to homogenize sources. And there's no really one good answer. But fortunately, because there's so many different people, they're coming up with a lot of different answers. And so there are a lot of different solutions. So in the future, there are going to be people educated a variety of different ways who are all going around screaming in each other's faces. And while that may seem unproductive and even alarming in the short run, especially to people who are trying to get, argumentative people to shut up, I think in the long run, these are important arguments to have, because it means that people are listening to different sources. And while that means that a lot of the time I'm going to be wrong, oh my gosh, so wrong, and find out that I'm wrong and feel so much shame about it because you can't imagine. But I'll be wrong all the time. I'm wrong all the time because I didn't have access to the same sources of information that other people were. So I'm wrong about a lot of things that people are really surprised about, especially things about pop culture. Like, I don't know things that everyone knows. Not being exposed to Michael Jackson until like the 2000s. It's really weird. My life is weird. So having bizarre knowledge that I shouldn't, and then like having encyclopedic knowledge of like the Watergate scandal, but then not having heard Thriller until after the year 2000. Thriller, like the song, any of the songs off the album, not having seen the video, none of that. It's weird. You know, the things I know, the things I don't. But then I would know some weird things about pop culture that were sort of like clandestinely sneaked into my world sideways by accident. So I'm wrong about a lot of things. But the first person who ever told me that I was homeless was someone who worked to get housing for homeless people in this area. He was one of 11 people at an adult care review for me. Just me in a room with 11 specialists. It was put together by a state-funded agency that provides my psychiatric services. I was trying to find out if I qualified for more services, and they said, you know, we're going to do our first adult care review, and they brought me out there, and then the housing person, when I told him my situation, he said, "You're homeless then." And I said, "Well, no, I'm living in an RV." He said, "Do you own the RV?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you have any kind of a lease or agreement?" "No." Will the person possibly evict you? "Yes, absolutely, you could do so at any time." "You're homeless then." So this isn't me just like getting histrionic and saying, "I'm homeless, I'm as homeless as the person on this." I never said that, you know, and it's not like homeless is like you have to be this homeless to ride this ride. And it's not like homelessness is a competition. Homelessness means not having stability in your life, not being sure that you're going to have a place tomorrow to sleep. I can wake up in that bed today and not know, you know, anything can happen. Anything can happen any day for any reason. And while that's true, like in the larger sense, it's even more true for me because I don't own this place. I don't know. This isn't a really safe place, but it's safer than a homeless shelter. It's a lot better than a homeless shelter. And homeless shelters have time limits. And I've just been stuck in this Social Security thing. And the thing about housing is the housing coordinator, there's no better options for me. I cannot get a different housing option unless I'm on Social Security disability income. A lot of people fall into this gap of they're waiting for Social Security disability income and they're running out of money because they don't have any income. Just because you don't have rent, it doesn't mean that you don't still have expenses. And we're sitting here for years and we still have expenses. You know, rent can be a really big expense. And if you're paying rent and you have income, it can be easy to forget that there are other expenses. In food and nutrition services, you can qualify for food stamps, but then not qualify for Medicaid and not qualify for any other services. And I don't qualify for anything but food stamps right now. I have to have a car to get to appointments for care, for health care, and for psychological care for my conditions, for my medications. For food means that most of my expenses are from my car. There's no way I can get a ride with anybody, and even if I could, I can't trust them. I can't trust anybody. So I still have expenses. I still have a lot of expenses for that car. I try not to go anywhere or do anything, and that's really depressing. Really, really depressing. My life can look really great if you're just looking at the videos. And if you just look at the videos and then imagine like some sort of a life beyond the videos that looks like yours would. Or if you imagine yours would if you didn't have a job, but yet still had all of your stuff and your money and your income, and you didn't have the fears that I live with, and didn't have my past, and didn't have my conditions, And I know, again, like, I can hear myself whining and you're like, oh, rolling your eyes, because you have no idea what this feels like. You have your life. I don't know what your life feels like. But again, this is a thing of, you cannot trade out someone's experiences for someone else's experiences. There's no way for me to know what it feels like to be you, or for you to know what it feels like to be me. I really like the thing that they invented for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy movie, the point of view gun, where you aim it at somebody, you shoot it, and they know what it feels like to be you. That's a great idea, but it's never going to happen. I wish it could. And I know that whining and complaining on the internet is not the ideal way to do it, because most people are just like, oh God, will you shut up already? I know that. I'm listening to myself and I feel like, oh, I wish I could just find some better way to express this. But this is all I've got. And it's this or not say anything. And I tried not saying anything for years, and it didn't help anything. And in fact, I was falling apart inside because I didn't have any kind of outlet. I couldn't say anything. And when you're in pain and you're not complaining, nobody helps at all. Just the problem is when you start complaining, a lot of people tell you to shut up. You gotta just fine, baby. No, I don't. And nothing you say can make that true. I'm not lying. This whole thing with the Social Security disability income has been a long process of the Social Security Administration saying that I'm not disabled enough. And it's true, there is a range of disabilities. There's some disabilities where you can be disabled and still work. I'm too disabled to work at all. It's just how it is. There are disabilities that disable you from being able to do some things, but you're able to do other things. That's pretty much what disability is. There are certain things you can't do. And the things that I can't do are work for money. And this situation has made everything worse. And having people say, no, you're lying, you're not disabled enough, you're not homeless enough, invalidation, that all makes it worse. It's more traumatizing. But the nice thing about these videos is I'm leading the conversation here. It's my space, and I get ultimate say over this conversation. And that's a power that I haven't often had in the past. And at least I'm finally connecting with other people who are disabled and are homeless and are struggling and are also invisible and have dealt with this same stuff of people telling them, just suck it up. People who don't have to live with this. But you know what? I refuse to base my decisions on the advice of people who don't have to live with the results. And you can feel free to use that yourself. Because as soon as I heard that, I realized that's a really good idea. Don't base my decisions on the advice of people who don't have to live with the results. Because it's really easy to say, no, that's not a thing, when you don't have to live with the consequences of that. It's really easy to say, oh, forget it, when you don't have to live with the results of that. It's really easy to just do anything when you don't have to live with the consequences. It's really easy to say anything when you don't have to live with the consequences. And this is not a new thing. Humans have known this a long time. It's just that now that we're more interconnected and able to communicate with each other a lot more, we're hearing it and seeing it a lot more. But I've known this my whole life. Because I've had people telling me my whole life that my pain isn't real and it doesn't matter. And they were abusers, because it's a form of abuse to do that to someone that you're hurting. To hurt someone and say your pain isn't real. It's a really simple way to abuse somebody and then make it their fault. I do get very defensive about this, I guess because the only people whose opinion really matters about whether or not I'm disabled and whether or not I'm homeless are the people who are in a position to provide services to me. The Social Security disability income thing has been a process of them denying my claim for disability, and that does endanger my life. If I don't have any money to pay my bills, I can't survive. So it is becoming a question of survival. And so that's terrifying. So of course, it's a bit of a touchy issue. If it's something that's endangering my life, it's going to be a touchy issue. Why does this matter to The people who are saying, no, you're not. The random, out of nowhere people who feel moved to say, no, you're not. This has been happening my whole life, not just from like my caregivers and Social Security and people who are in a position to do something about my basic needs. They have a vested interest in denying me these things because it requires them giving things to me. Social Security has a vested interest in not giving me income for disability. That's just a fact of life. But what about these other random people who they come and they watch my videos and then they decide to say, no, you're not? What about people to whom I'm talking who right up until they say, no, you're not, are my friends? What's in it for them? Why do they go to the trouble of arguing with me? There's no phrase that's going to hand wave away my problems. Just by saying, no, you're not, does not make the problem go away. Amazingly enough, that doesn't make the problem go away. But what does it even matter? You don't live with the consequences either way, and total stranger, what does it even matter? Maybe it's a way to reconcile the discomfort of cognitive dissonance between like seeing something and then having the picture that you're seeing and then what you're hearing not match up. That's the problem with judging based on looks. We'll disbelieve someone if what they look like doesn't match what they're saying. Sometimes that's really dangerous. You know, if somebody's in pain and they don't look like they're in pain, it's really dangerous. It's too simplistic. We're human beings. We're better than that. We're able to get past that. That's my theory. But as I said, I can be wrong about a lot of things. It's just I wonder, you know, because I can feel myself getting really defensive, and it's clear to me why. Because this is something that's a life or death issue for me. It's not intellectual. It's not a like thing on the other end of a long string that you just type it once and then forget about it. This is a life or death every day, day in, day out issue for me. This is the big thing. This is I am trying to survive crap. It means a lot. But I think, what's in this for somebody else? Why do they care so much? Why do they bother? And why do people crap all over my friendship? Especially privileged people. They decide to react to my problems, to say you don't really have problems, or to compare their problems to mine. I don't think they're actually thinking about it. Maybe they want to somehow magically wave a wand and make my problems disappear, but what actually happens is when they wave their wands, the friendship disappears every single time, because there can't be any friendship after that. There was one other thing I was thinking about, why people might go out of their way to say, no, you're not disabled, no, you're not homeless. And maybe it's because they're made uncomfortable, and it's an easy way to deal with that discomfort. Because it's easier to say, no, you're lying, because it makes the uncomfortable feelings go away. It's an easy way to not do empathy, to not feel for someone. It's easier to say, well, no, you're lying. If you're in a situation like mine, there's no way to fix it. And a lot of people, it's like, well, okay, well, if we can't fix it, there's nothing I can do, and I'm stuck with these bad feelings and I can't make them go away. And that, I don't like that. Like, well, okay, but I feel bad all the time. And it irritates me that they're getting angry at me because they're feeling a little taste of badness because they're empathizing with me. Or maybe, I don't know. I don't know, because they're taking out their anger on me. But for me, it's like, it's hard for me to understand. Why are you getting angry at me? And what I refer to is back when I was more privileged and I would encounter people with problems and I would immediately slip into problem solving mode and I would try to fix things. It's like I wasn't conscious. I was just reacting the way that the people around me reacted to my problems, which was just throw solutions at me until I shut up. And it wasn't until I started realizing how bad I felt when people did that to me that I stopped doing it to other people. And then gradually I realized that just because I had stopped doing it to other people, it didn't mean that they stopped doing it to me. And then I realized there was nothing that I could do or say to make people stop doing it to me. I just had to cut those people out of my life. There was no understanding that I could reach that could get people to stop doing what it is that they just automatically do in situations when they're uncomfortable. If they're reacting instead of responding, then I've already lost. The situation is already gone because there's nothing that I can do or say, pretty much. It's really frustrating because increasingly my life is like that. Thanks for watching.